Is Sarah from St Augustine's in yet?
We're now live, Chair.
Thank you. Okay, good evening everyone, and thank you for coming along to this evening's meeting, the police scrutiny. So first of all, if we move on to the substitutes nominated for the meeting, and apologies for absence, please.
Yes, Chair, we've got Councillor Dickinson has sent his apologies, and we've got Councillor Benton substituting for Councillor Dickinson.
Right, thank you very much. Members' interest, to remind everyone that if they need to declare disclose a pecuniary interest or other interest they might have in relation to the items included on the agenda, please do so now or when the item arises. So I don't know if anyone has. Nope, we can do it later anyway. Right, so admission of the public. It's not a public meeting, but the public are not excluded from this. And there's nothing excluded on tonight's agenda. So before we go to the minutes, I was just going to introduce, we've got a couple of new people, so I thought it might be nice to just introduce them, or they expect them to introduce themselves. We've got, who have we got, where are you? Oh, I've got Ben, who's joining us, joining Mike as a new scrutiny officer. Is that right? Yes, a new scrutiny officer with Bella and Mike. And we have also got Adrian Gill. I can't see him on my screen, but Adrian is the new assistant director of, let's see, where have you gone? Strategic Infrastructure. We'll be hearing from him later on. So thank you very much for coming along to the meeting. Right, we've got also, hopefully later on, we'll have Sarah from St Augustine's joining us to talk about the first item. I think that's all going to happen if she's coming in. Right, so minutes of the last meeting. Has everybody had a chance to see them? And would anybody like to sign them off as a true record? Dave, thank you. Seconded by anybody seconding? Anybody who was there?
Councillor Clark, Chair.
Right, thank you. Right, that's super. Okay, so moving on to the first item, which is the overview of asylum provision in Calderdale. So we're quite pleased to have this at scrutiny. And I think we've all been circulated, we've been circulated with the report, and we also have all had a copy of the slides. And so I'm going to just hand it over to Kirsten, who will lead the discussion. Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, I'll share my screen with the presentation in a minute. I've just made some tiny minor updates to the one that you've received, but I'll share this final version with you at the end of this meeting. The Sarah Robinson from St Augustine's and I are going to be delivering together. So I'll talk through the first part of my presentation, then hand over to Sarah, and then I'll come back in after Sarah with a little bit more information on some of the challenges and the funding streams that we're looking at. Okay, so I'll share my screen. Are people able to see that?
No,
Not yet, Kirsten.
It's not visible.
Not yet, no.
Okay. I don't know why. Let's have a look. Share. Oh, here we go.
yeah, that's it.
Is that okay now? All right. There we go. Okay. I'll just move you out there. So, okay. So I've been asked to report to you on asylum provision in Calderdale, which the bulk of my report's going to cover, but I'm also going to have a little bit more wider context on other new migrants into the borough, which includes some of the resettlement schemes that you'll be aware of. So the UK is a signatory to the Refugee Convention signed in 1951, which lays out the criteria by which people can seek safety in the UK and be defined as a refugee. And our signatory status means that we have a legal obligation to accept people to live in the UK as refugees under this criteria as defined. So in terms of some clarity around definitions of the difference between an asylum seeker and a refugee. An asylum seeker is someone who's going through the process of applying for that criteria and being recognised as a refugee. And a refugee is someone who has been through that process, had their application receive a positive decision, and they are deemed a refugee under the rights of the convention. So in terms of the rights of people of those two statuses, asylum seekers and refugees, there are some key differences. So someone who is going through the application process under the Refugee Convention is an asylum seeker, and they're not allowed to work in the UK. The subsistence that's provided is quite low. It's nearly half that of universal credit. I've put the figures there for you. For those in dispersed accommodation, which is essentially houses and flats, where people cater for themselves in terms of food and all other provision. And then people in contingency accommodation, which is those accommodations you have heard about in terms of usually hotels, but also other styles of contingency accommodation. It's a much lower amount of money. That's because food is provided as part of that contingency accommodation. The money that is provided for people in the asylum system is provided through a card called the Aspen card. It's a plastic card with a visa symbol. It's only usable in places that have visa signs. It is possible to draw cash from it in some cases, though that's not always very straightforward. And then those who have had their refugee status recognised and had a positive decision, once they've received that positive decision, they're allowed to work. They can claim benefits. However, they only have 28 days with which they need to find new accommodation outside of the asylum housing estate, which is in Calderdale managed by a company called Mears. So that 28-day period is quite tight to find new housing. I'm sure some of you will be aware of the challenges around housing. I know you're talking about that later today. So we have a move on service that we deliver as a council that supports people through that process. Alongside our asylum seeking population, we also have a number of resettlement schemes that we support in Calderdale. There's the Syrian and Sudanese schemes, the Afghan scheme, and currently the Homes for Ukraine scheme as well. All these schemes come with different packages of financial support across varying time spans between 2 and 5 years. For example, the Afghan and Syrian scheme bring 5 years of support for families to integrate into their new homes. That support can include a variety of things around local orientation, education skills, school support, whatever's needed for that family. So in addition to that, we also have unaccompanied children in Calderdale. We were a voluntary local authority who took unaccompanied asylum seeking children. That became a national requirement for all local authorities a year and a half ago. The numbers of children we support has increased significantly in the last 18 months, from around 5 or 6 a year at any one time to now we have about 18 children that we're supporting. So I'm just going to give you a little bit of information about the figures in terms of asylum seeking before I hand over to Sarah to talk about the kind of support and work that happens with our asylum seeking refugee population, which St Augustine's deliver. So you can see here from the graph that the data goes up to the third quarter of 2022. That's because the Home Office data that we're given is generally very delayed. So the most recent information I have is for the end of October. We never get given real-time data on how many people are currently accommodated. So at the end of October, there were 495 people who were in dispersed accommodation in Calderdale. At that time, there were 210 people in hotels in Calderdale, which means the total number of people was 705 at that time. Now you can see from the graph that that's a significant increase. So in the last year to 18 months, our population of asylum seekers in Calderdale has increased by nearly 80%. I just want to give you some national figures, just a headline on the national figures. There's lots of data out there. But at the end of June last year, there were nearly 130 people in the asylum system who were waiting for a decision on their application. That's nearly 4 times higher than the number of cases that were awaiting a decision by the end of June in 2018. So there's a significant backlog in decision making. There are approximately more than 42,000 people currently housed in contingency accommodation because there hasn't been enough dispersal accommodation available to move people onto. And I'll just give you a quick overview of the hotels in Calderdale. We had our first hotel open in the end of summer 2019 with 23 people. We had a second hotel open at Christmas in 2021, so just over a year ago. That was for 110 people. And a third hotel open in July for 40 people. So we've seen a significant increase in our hotel population in recent months. I'm going to hand over now to Sarah, who'll talk about St Augustine's work. And then when Sarah's finished, I'm going to come back with just a bit more information about the funding we've received, what we're doing with it, and the key challenges we're facing, and also what partners do we work with. So I'm going to stop sharing now, if I can work out how to do that. Does anybody know how I stop sharing?
I think it should be at the top of the screen. There should be like is it an exit button or something?
Oh, it's just giving me.
Are Sarah's slides on the same presentation, Kirsten?
No, they're separate.
Oh, right, okay.
Down at the bottom, Kirsten, where it says share screen.
It's just because I've shared, it's not showing me that.
And at the top, it should say stop share. There should be, if you sort of go to the top of your screen, stop share.
It's not giving me that. What I might do is leave, and then then I'll just appear back. I think that's the best thing to do, if that's okay.
Well, at the top of your screen, you should have a green band where it says you are sharing, or we're sharing your screen. Have you got a view options? If you right click that, or there's a little arrow, if you click that, it says stop participant sharing.
No.
No.
Who's the host? Can someone make me the host?
Oh,
There we go. I just did it because I'm also co-host. There we go.
thank you, Bella.
You've done it.
Thank you, Bella.
Apologies. Okay, hand over to Sarah then.
Okay, can everybody see that? Great. Hello, thank you very much for inviting me to talk. I'm going to talk for about 10 minutes. I might be quite rapid. There's a lot to get through. I'm going to tell you about our work at St Augustine's, a bit about the people that we support, and I'm going to bust some myths because we need that. So probably quite a lot of you know St Augustine's. We've been going since 1952. We were set up as a church playgroup by a woman called Denise, and then we became a community centre. And in 2001, the first person seeking asylum turned up on the doorstep because the area had become used for dispersal accommodation. And then we've evolved since then. Now we're independent from the church, and we are Calderdale's only organisation that specialises in day-to-day support of people seeking sanctuary. But I want to say that the ethos that we work with is still the same as it was all those years ago, led by Denise, which is about listening to people, responding to their needs, and believing in equality. Because we believe that, as I'm sure you do, that we're all equal citizens of the earth, and that no matter where we're from, no one is illegal. And if any one of us had to flee our homeland because our houses were bombed, or we'd watched our parents being murdered for opposing a fascist regime, or we knew we'd be jailed for life for our religion or our sexuality, we'd hope that there'd be somewhere in the world that we could go to rebuild our lives. Sorry, just trying. I don't know why that's come up there. You can still see it okay. We support 1,000 people, usually each year. And those are mainly people seeking asylum and also some refugees. And we call those people our centre members, and they come from 67 different countries. Many come in family groups. 60% of those we support are men, 40% are female, and they're all ages. And it won't surprise you to know that the top 5 countries people come from are Syria, Afghanistan, Iraq, Iran, Eritrea, Ethiopia. And we took quite a difficult decision earlier last year not to work with people from Ukraine, mainly because there's a lot more help in place through government schemes and local authority schemes and the goodwill of local people. We need to focus on supporting those who are also fleeing war and persecution, but for whom there's no lifelines set up. So onto our work. What do? We do lots of things. We have a staff team of 180. A staff team of 180. I wish we have a small staff team, but we have a big volunteer pool of 180 people. I'm struggling to move this. A big part of our work is advice and support. So we are registered to offer specialist immigration advice. We do a lot of work in health and housing and benefits and work and education, as you'd imagine, quite a bit around mental health as well. We have a cafe. You're all welcome to come to our cafe. It's open to anybody, not just people seeking asylum, and it's run by our centre members. Delicious food every Monday and Thursday. English is the sort of bedrock of what we do. So we do 15 English classes a week, including in the hotels that Kirsten's just mentioned. And we have a podcast that is listened to internationally. We have a free shop. So often people arrive just in the clothes that they're wearing. And they come to us and we have donated clothes and shoes. And we also have a salon now that is run again by our centre members. It's all run by our centre members. So we have a nail bar, we do hair and beauty. We do sports. We have our own football team. We have a brilliant boxing club, women's fitness, cricket. We have regular walks. In fact, our walking group are meeting with Claire Balding on Saturday, and she's going to do a feature on Radio 4, which is really exciting. And we do arts. We have a visual arts group. These are all weekly groups. We have a house band. We have a music group. We have a creative writing group. And some of you might have taken part in the Orange Heart that we did at the Peace Hall last March. And we do a lot of refurbishing. So we have a bike library that we run in the spring and summer months. People donate their laptops and phones and we do those up and we give them out to people, because having a bike, having a phone is so essential. And often when people arrive in the UK, they get their phones taken off them. So volunteering, giving people opportunities to volunteer is really, really important for us. And we have a befriending scheme for those that are isolated. Our volunteers, as I say, sort of run St. Augustine's. They do our reception, they cut hair, they do our gardening, they help teach English, lots and lots of things. And they inspire us with their resilience every day because they want to contribute. And as many of you know, and Kirsten alluded to earlier, one of the great frustrations for people seeking sanctuary is that they're not permitted to work. And they want to pay their way, and many have really significant skills, you know, surgeons, cooks, nurses, drivers, IT whiz kids. We've got a guy from Afghanistan at the moment who's on trial to be in the Yorkshire County Cricket Club. We've got another guy who's deaf who plays for Halifax Panthers wheelchair rugby squad, and they won the Rugby League Grand Final a few months back. And we have centre members that also contribute more widely. So when in the sort of heat of the pandemic, we had 3 people who were health professionals who were COVID champions. We've got people volunteering at Oxfam, in churches, at Age UK. They do litter picking, they cleaned the Shay just before it reopened. And we've got men from one of the hotels about to start volunteering at Ellen Food Bank and hopefully Overgate Hospice as well. So that's about our work. I'm just going to bust a few myths because I think that's really, really important. We've all heard in the news, obviously, about people coming over by boat, that people have no choice but to make that horrific, life-threatening journey. And I'm sure you've heard the saying that no one would put their child on a boat unless the water was safer than the land. We hear the media using words like invasion. And we hear people seeking asylum being blamed for the housing crisis in the UK, the economic situation, a failing NHS, and more. The reality is there are 80 million displaced people in the world, displaced through war, persecution, famine, environmental issues. And I wonder if you know how many of those 80 million actually make their way to the UK. It's 1%. It's 1%. And I wonder if you know that 75% of those displaced people around the world actually end up fleeing to neighboring countries. In fact, the countries that host the world, most of the world's, or the largest numbers of refugees compared to population head, is Colombia, Turkey, and Pakistan. France has nearly twice as many asylum seekers as the UK, and Germany 3 times. So when you hear people say that people need to stop in the first safe country they get to, or why don't they just stay in France? Well, they do. The vast majority do. And those that do make it to the UK, they come here because they speak the language, or because they have family here, or because there are ties to our colonial past and connections with their own heritage. If you were fleeing war or persecution, you'd probably make a choice to be near loved ones. Unfortunately, our hostile and broken asylum system doesn't prevent people making that perilous journey overseas. When they have no choice, they will do that. And the reality is that the number of people that actually make it to the UK makes up less than 1% of our population. So just 1%. I think it's actually a third of the percent of UK population is people seeking sanctuary, by which I mean refugees and those seeking asylum. Another thing you'll have heard a lot is Suella Braverman and others saying that if people want to seek asylum, they need to choose a safe route. But the truth is there is no safe route. There is no safe route to the UK. There's no application and there's no visa process that allows people to enter the UK and claim asylum. And recent legislation, the Nationality and Borders Bill, means that they have deemed it illegal. And it's awful when we keep hearing that word used again and again. Over the last year, the Home Office has issued over 2.5 million visas. But those are for people to visit, or to study, or to work, or to be with family. The remaining 11% for Ukrainian refugees to receive sanctuary, quite rightly, and for British nationals to settle in Hong Kong. None of the visas are available for people seeking asylum. But for the relatively small number of people of non-Ukrainian nationality, Eritrea, Syria, Afghanistan, there's nothing. There's smugglers and there's dangerous journeys. I want to mention hotels briefly. Kirsten said there's been a change quite recently. There are now 3 hotels in Calderdale, and that's really changed the way we work. It's important to know that in 2019, so just over 2 years ago, there were only 423 people in the UK living in hotels. And now, by the end of 21, there was 26,000. I don't know what that number is now, probably over 40,000. And that it's important that you know that isn't because there's loads more people coming over. There has been an increase, people coming, but nothing like that. The reason is because it's static. The system is broken. 4% of people seeking asylum last year have had their claims processed, just 4%. So there's a bottleneck. It's static and it's stuck. And hotel accommodation is really, really not the answer. I'm just going to talk about the challenges that people seeking sanctuary face. So people seeking sanctuary are 5 times more likely to have mental health issues than the general population. They come here with trauma from the journey they've made, from the reasons that they've had to flee and leave their loved ones behind. We work with a lot of women who had to leave their children. We find people feel very isolated, far from home in this new cultural world, perhaps without the language to navigate it. We have a lot of our work is simply saying to someone, this is how you post a letter. So it's that level of details. Kirsten mentioned people living on the equivalent of £5 a day and not being able to work. The accommodation is tough if they're in houses. Often it's very, it won't surprise you, very poor stock. We have issues with rats, leaking ceilings, leaking roofs, damp. And living in hotel is really tough for people. They can't cook their own food. They can't choose their own food. It's a very intense environment. Sometimes the relationship with meals can be quite strained, and we see people get institutionalized and forgotten. And those in a rural hotel, what can they do? They can't afford a ticket. People living in hotel don't get £5 a day, by the way. They get £8 a week if they get that. So how do they afford a bus ticket out? The asylum system is very tough. One of our trustees, Doreen, she waited 9 years for a decision. So it's very, very complex. And because of the stopping of legal aid, there's very little solicitor representation anymore. So people are having to represent themselves. And so we see people stuck in limbo, waiting and waiting, the loss of skills and identity, sense of control, and dealing with the hostile environment and the racism that we know about. And 25% of children seeking asylum have to wait between 3 and 6 months for a school place. The government have also cut ESOL provision by 60% in real terms in the last few years. So getting access to English provision is tough. And yet, and I've almost finished, we know that the goodwill of local people and organisations, and I have to say, some of the brilliant staff and elected members at Calderdale Council, alongside the work we do at St Augustine's, goes a really long way to mitigating these challenges. And I think anything that acknowledges people as human beings, like you or I, with a smile and a welcome to help them feel that they can become part of our valley and community, can be really, really transformative. And I'll end it there. I'm happy to answer questions later. Thank you for listening.
Thank you, Sarah. I'm just going to finish now with a couple of more slides that I've got, just to give you a bit more information around the picture for Calderdale. Let's hope I can manage to share and unshare adequately. If not, then Bella, I might need you to come in and take me offline. So here we go. Can people see this? Yeah? Okay. So I'll just go through the key partners that we work with in the council in terms of working with this population, as well as St Augustine's and the Valley of Sanctuary, which is a collaboration of voluntary sector organisations that support this community across Calderdale. We work with Migration Yorkshire, who are a strategic migration partnership. Every region has one. They cover West Yorkshire, and they're our key contact through to the Home Office on a regional basis. We also work closely with our West Yorkshire colleagues alongside Migration Yorkshire, particularly with Bradford and Kirklees for obvious reasons, but also Wakefield and Leeds and further afield than that in Hull and other places. The Community Foundation for Calderdale and the wider voluntary sector are key elements of what we do in terms of trying to use support most effectively in Calderdale for this community. So Community Foundation help with funding and support funding facilitation, and St Augustine's have been playing a key role with increasing skills within the wider voluntary sector across Calderdale as our community have expanded and started to move to new areas of the borough. Our partners in health are obviously really key partners and are feeling the impact of the rising numbers as much as other partners are. So we work with the ICB, who commission GP services, and they have commissioned an organisation called Bevan Healthcare, who provide healthcare particularly for the hotel population, and also Solace, who provide mental health support, psychological mental health support for the community in Calderdale. And obviously we work closely with our police colleagues in the neighbourhood teams, but also more widely in precision teams and the CTU around threats around risk of extremism projected towards our asylum seeking population, and our community protection team. So in terms of funding, the funding and resources that are given to local authorities and to Calderdale in particular, up until March last year, no local authorities received any funding at all for asylum support. And in March this year, a declaration was made by the Home Office of full dispersal. Up until that point, local authorities who took part in dispersal of asylum seekers did so voluntary. As of March last year, with the full dispersal model, it was to become compulsory for all local authorities in the UK to take part in the scheme. As part of that, those of us who had already been supporting communities were given a one-off payment which I've demonstrated here how it's calculated. For Calderdale, that amounted to £142,500. And then from April onwards, a payment per bed space procured by MEAS is allocated to local authorities. As I mentioned earlier with the data issue, we never know how many new bed spaces have been acquired over a period of time. So we are awarded an amount of money, but without any back information to really examine whether that's the appropriate amount of money, which is something that we're challenging the Home Office on. So just by contrast, those people who arrive under resettlement schemes, that includes Homes for Ukraine, but also the Afghan schemes, local authorities are given £10,500 per person for 12 months to support those people. So you can see there's quite a significant disparity between the amount of funding that's aimed towards supporting the asylum seeking population and those who come under a resettlement scheme. So just a bit about how we're using the funding. We've had extreme increase in workload. So I've recruited a new migration coordinator in my service, having not had any post dedicated to asylum before. And she works really closely with MEAS, with St Augustine's and around the hotels, and facilitates a lot of the partnership working and collaboration that happens as a result of the increased population need. We fund St Augustine's with a grant fund for the areas of work that Sarah's talked about: integration support, ESOL, and advice and support. And we fund the refugee and move on service, which I also mentioned earlier, which is to help people in that first 28 days when they've had a positive decision and they need to move on. And then we've tried to bolster some of the ESOL provision as a result of the drop in funding that's come generally for ESOL. So I'm just going to end with our key challenges before we move on to questions. Some of those Sarah's mentioned already. The data issue, I think I've explained that it's a problem for us. The additional issue we've got around data is that we are not allowed to share it with the voluntary sector. So quite often St Augustine's are kind of working in the dark about the number of people that are coming into the borough. We try and give them as much information as we're allowed, but we're not allowed to share the data that we're given by the Home Office. In terms of safeguarding, we have had some concerns, quite serious concerns about the numbers of people who have been absconding from hotels and the associated modern slavery and human trafficking risk. So our Modern Slavery Partnership and our Community Safety Partnership have been looking at how to work together to try and mitigate that risk as much as possible. In terms of cohesion and community tensions, Sarah alluded to some of it. We have had right-wing YouTubers arrive at our hotels and broadcast their visits. We have seen hateful posts on social media directed towards our hotel population, in some cases naming hotels. So there has been a clear impact on our asylum seeking community. And obviously we're working with our partners to try and manage that as well as we can, and work with host communities as well as our asylum seeking communities. The funding picture is uncertain. So as I said earlier, we didn't have any funding at all till March this year. We have some funding now, but there's still no picture of what's going to happen longer term. That means that we can't really fund the voluntary sector for anything more than 12 months at a time, which provides some serious resilience issues for them and also for us in terms of ability to recruit and retain staff. I've put in the issue around standing up of hotels without notification. So the procedure is that we should be notified before a hotel is stood up in order that we can draw partnerships together to respond appropriately to the need that brings. There has been a situation in Calderdale and our neighbouring boroughs where hotels were stood up without any notification. This was mostly due to the emptying of Manston, and people were brought into the borough without any notification to us. We challenge this strongly, and we've been given assurance by the Home Office that this will not happen again, and notification will always be given in advance of a hotel being used. Pressure on housing stock. I know you're familiar with that. I mentioned it earlier. You'll be talking about that later. And in terms of unaccompanied children and age assessment, I think I've mentioned that as well. We've got some serious increased numbers. That's a big strain on our children's services, managing those. In terms of our most deprived areas, so 90% of our dispersed asylum seekers and a significant number of the hotel, 2 of the 3 hotels, so most of the hotel population all live in one postcode area. This is one of our most deprived areas. It places a really big strain on health and public services in those areas. And in terms of public health, I know there's been information in the press about communicable diseases. The public health perspective is that the risk of that is low from importing the disease through arrival, but it is massively increased by the way people have been housed when they've arrived in the UK. And of course, we have concerns about significant mental health challenges following that trauma of leaving home, the journey and the experience people have once they have arrived in the UK. Okay, so I'm going to end there. Bella, if you could unshare for me, and I'll take any questions.
Right, thank you very much. That's been so interesting. I mean, I know St Augustine's quite well, and I know that the work you do is absolutely amazing. But I think highlighting the things like the £1 a day for those people in hotels. I mean, if you've got a child and they want a bar of chocolate or need some little tiny treat, you're not even going to be able to afford that. I think I've got loads of things I want to ask, as you might guess, but I'd like to open it up and see if anybody else wants to ask any questions. And remember, we can also ask Jenny for a more sort of political view of it, because, you know, the Nationality and Borders Act has made it much, it's almost legislated the hostile environment that was creeping in. Well, not creeping, probably. Yeah, covering all areas of life for people seeking asylum. Right, Joe, you've got your hand up. Good, I'll stop talking.
Yeah, this is kind of a dual question for Kirsten and Sarah. I think one of the things that stands out to me as a huge issue we're going to see going forward, and it's been referenced, is the huge amount of volunteers that are being relied on. But my concern is, and this is both anecdotally and through knowing people in that situation, is that as the pressures that people are going through, whether it's energy bills, heating, all of that, people's capacity to volunteer and to help will go down. And then that, I worry that that will have a subsequent impact on also the service people are receiving, in terms of, like, you know, St Augustine's has got 180 volunteers. Say 10, 20, 30 of those people are unable to do it, whether it's financial or otherwise, how that further impacts. And I was just wondering if we are starting to see that effect going forward, and is, you know, what can be done about it. I know some charities have actually had to shift and start doing cost of living support for volunteers as part of their work because it's that bad, but I just thought I'd raise that here as well as an issue, because I imagine it is coming up.
I'm going to let Sarah answer that, because I think it more lies in her area of working with the volunteer contribution.
I mean, half of our volunteers are centre members and they're desperate to volunteer. So in a way, we've got a kind of ready-made pool of people that are just really, really keen to, and they keep changing. So the rest are people from Calderdale or further afield. We have a pot so we can pay for volunteers' travel or any expenses. I don't think that that's one of our key challenges. I think we don't struggle to find volunteers. We have people on a waiting list, actually. So the moment that may change in the future, but the key from what you've said is that we make it possible for anybody to volunteer, that we give them a meal, we cover their transport to us, and make that possible if they've got the time.
Has anyone else got a question? Right, if not, I've got a few that I'd like to ask. I'm just thinking about the housing stock and the relationship with environmental health and getting, you know, that's additional pressure on environmental health. Are people in these houses getting, you know, accessing the support that they need? Is that quite a good relationship you've got with them? I mean, later on in this meeting, we're going to be talking about, you know, the resources that are allocated towards environmental health and their enforcement and their ability to sort of take enforcement action against landlords that are providing substandard accommodation. It's got a good and a bad side, hasn't it? Because a house is almost better than a hotel, because it means your children can get into school when you've got a little bit of settlement. But I don't know. I wonder what you think about that.
Do you want me to come back in to that question, Audrey?
Yeah.
So as Sarah may want to add into that, the experience of residents in MERS when they have a poor property, a poor condition of their property, is they have to go through the migrant help complaints system, which is the most significant barrier. So it's not really about the relationship with our environmental health officers. Environmental health need to be notified that there's a property, and they will be notified that there's property of concern, and they'll inspect it. But there is this barrier with making complaints through migrant help. I don't know, Sarah, if you want to add a bit of information to that.
Just that it's really difficult, and the housing stock is really poor, but it is all managed by MERS. We at St Augustine's don't really want to get too involved in that, because actually it's not our responsibility, but MERS can be, as you know, Audrey, I imagine, can take days, weeks, sometimes months to deal with a really significant issue like rat infestation for families living in housing.
Yeah.
But that's people seeking asylum who are in MERS accommodation. When people get refugee status, they then move maybe into private rented accommodation, and that's a different kettle of fish, as it is for anybody in rented accommodation. I
suppose I'm just thinking about the ability for environmental health to take action and then enforce against MERS, because they basically have the tenancy, don't they? I mean, you're right, it is that barrier that's put up to stop any action being taken. But yeah, that's fine. I've just got another question about the 3,500 per bed space. Does that include bed spaces in hotels?
No, sadly.
So we've got people in hotels for months and months and months, and we get no additional. I'm just thinking about the impact on the borough, and I think politically we should be asking for people in hotels to be subsidised or to have more income, because £1 a day, that is just pushing them into poverty and making them much more prone to exploitation. And I think that, and the impact of somebody having maybe £10 or £5 a day even, it's good for the local community, because the money, if you've got less money, you spend it more closely to home. So I think it's just the argument for us as a council. We should be looking at asking for more funding for those people in hotels. Is there anything we can do about that, Jenny? Jenny, sorry. Councillor Lynn.
Yes. Yeah, well, I just wanted to come in, and I wasn't necessarily going to be able to respond to the question that you've just put, Audrey, Councillor Smith. But I just wanted to mention a couple of things, really. First of all, I think that a lot of the MERS accommodation is actually concentrated in my ward, in Park Ward, where St Augustine's is located. And there's a part of me thinks that's absolutely brilliant, because Park Ward has always been the place since the middle of the 19th century, which had relatively cheap housing and where people moved in. So it's had communities, had Irish communities, Ukrainian communities, Polish communities, Caribbean communities, South Asian communities, and so on and so forth. So it's kind of got a history that's going back more than 150 years of welcoming new arrivals to Calderdale, and that's kind of like what it does, really. But so in one sense, I think it's really good, and I feel as though a lot of the people that I've been privileged to get to know who've come here seeking asylum have been brilliant, and I am so proud of what St Augustine's does now, and in particular the way in which its centre users are experts by experience in the process. So I just think that is absolutely brilliant. But I also wanted to say that I think that one of the things that hasn't been mentioned tonight, which I think is really important, is that, as far as Calderdale is concerned, we pride ourselves, I think, don't we? Everybody on this call probably, we pride ourselves that one of our values is about kindness and compassion. And we tried to do that during COVID, and we tried to do that during the floods, and we tried to do that. And for me, that has to be part of what it's about. And I was very fortunate recently to be invited to attend an event at Beach Hill School, again in my ward, which had been designated as a school of sanctuary. because they've been really, really pleased to welcome quite a few of the children that have been accommodated in one of the hotels that Kirsten was talking about. And I can tell you that I was there with the mayor and the mayor's consort one afternoon just before Christmas, and there was a young lad there, and I think he was originally from Afghanistan. He was about 10, and he just spoke a little bit about how lonely and disorientated he'd felt when he was living in the hotel room and all the rest of it, and how wonderful it felt when he went to school and he felt like they were his friends, and you know, he felt at home. And there was hardly a dry eye in the house, because it just made you think, this is what we should be about in Calderdale. This is what we should be about. And that young child, if he and his family are allowed to stay, and if he is given a welcome, then just try and imagine how much he is going to give back to us as a community as he grows up and he goes to education. So although I feel really angry about some of the situation, that's the way in which that some people who come to this country get demonised and all the rest of it, I also think that I've got, it's probably just optimism in the new year. I also feel we have to kind of hang on to this thing. We've committed to being a valley of sanctuary. We want everybody in Calderdale to put themselves in other people's shoes and think, how would we feel if this was us? And we want them to make other people welcome, and it'll enrich their lives no end. That's it from me. It's not a question, but I just wanted to have a chance to say that. Thank you.
Thanks, Jenny. And I totally agree with you. But I do also think, highlighting the positives is fantastic. But I suppose I just think that the responsibility or the irresponsibility of government policy at the moment is something that we need to sort of look at and try and challenge. Can I bring Jo in and then Sarah, please?
Just following on from a bit of what's been discussed so far, it strikes me as, we have touched on it, and the idea of dispersed accommodation, some elements of that are slightly preferable for people, that sense of independence and that sense of structure and all of that. But I just wanted to ask kind of what are the biggest barriers in terms of, because ideally you don't want this situation where people are stuck in hotels indefinitely. I think that's just, it's just irresponsible to get to that point, whether it's, this national bottleneck. I was just wondering, what are the barriers locally? Is it just that national issue of processing claims, or is there issues also around the housing stock and things like that as well?
Shall I pick that up? A number of things that you're addressing are about their decisions made at the Home Office that we have so little control over. So decisions about where people are placed, whether it's in a house or a hotel, and where it is in the country, there's no rhyme or reason to it. It's like where they are on the list. And there's nothing, as far as I know, there's nothing we can do about that in Calderdale. It's all decided centrally. Did you want to pick up on that, Kirsten? I've got a couple of other points, but I can come back to them.
Yeah, I just wanted to add in for Jo's benefit. So we know that mayors struggle to procure the number of properties that they're expected to procure. So they have a contract with the Home Office where they commit to procuring a certain number of dispersed accommodation to move people out of hotels. They've never ever managed to hit anything close to the targets that have been set under that contract. So from that, I think we understand that they struggle to procure enough dispersed properties in Calderdale as much as anywhere else.
Yeah, I suppose on that, it's just we've now got national dispersal where all councils are obliged to house people seeking sanctuary, but we still seem to have a disproportionate number of people being housed in cheap, unused hotels across sort of West Yorkshire, don't we? I mean, if we look at the figures, they're still being housed in the areas of, most deprivation, I suppose. And it just feels like they're saying one thing, but they're just they're giving people an even worse option than a house. Sarah, you want?
Well, it was just picking up on that the issue about housing and environmental issues related to housing stock that is procured and also the living costs that people are expected to live on, whether that's £8 if they're lucky in the hotels, or £5 a day in dispersed accommodation. As a council, you have the opportunity, I guess, to make your views known nationally. And I know that there is some will for Calderdale Council to consider becoming a council of sanctuary. So we're a valley of sanctuary, but that is owned by the whole valley. There are a number of councils that are councils of sanctuary. You have to go through a process to become one. But in terms of campaigning and being part of a national network and having a voice about those national issues, that might be a route you might consider going down. And I know Valley of Sanctuary and ourselves would love to support you if you decide that's something you want to do.
Sorry, nobody told me I was on mute. Yeah. Joe, do you want to come in?
I'll let Councillor Clark come in first because I'm aware
Oh,
I've spoken a couple of times.
Go on, Councillor Clark.
You're
Go
on
on mute,
mute.
Councillor Clark.
Thank you.
Thank you. I'd just like to see if we could question the government as to how they work out these allowances, this funding, this £8 a day and £8 a week, and then 10,500 for Ukrainian. And what, you know, why is Ukraine different to any other sanctuary seeking community? And I think we should somehow question the government's calculations. How do they work that out? What on earth are they trying to do? It's certainly not to make things easier for any asylum seekers or refugees. It's just my opinion.
Yeah.
Have any of you heard that?
Yeah, thank you. Anybody want to come back on that?
There is a you can see how they've calculated it. They've literally broken it down into sort of £8 for clothing and toiletries and such for food. It's a nonsense. It's a nonsense. And yeah, it would be great to keep campaigning against it. There aren't loud enough voices shouting out on a national level about this. These disgusting behaviours that are coming out of the Home Office at the moment.
Thank you.
Thanks, Sarah. Joe?
Yeah, I think unfortunately, just quickly on that, I think unfortunately we've almost entered this tiered system of asylum. It's like if you're from one place, you are valued more and given more priority, and obviously some of that is political, and without going into that, it is political. But I think it is deeply unfortunate that it's not treated equitably across the board. It is a hierarchy, you know. What I was just going to ask about, because we've talked a bit about MEAs and the procurement in terms of, so MEAs are allocated and they have to find as much dispersed accommodation as they can in an area which is national allocation. In terms of funding, are they funded for that nationally, or do they have to go out? And is part of the, we're going to come on to private rented accommodation later, but is part of that difficulty simply around cost, simply that they're not providing enough or don't have enough income to then find those properties?
So I just come in with that, if that's okay. So Councillor Thompson, there's a bit of an unknown around this, but essentially the MEA's contracts with the Home Office were 10-year contracts, and they started about 2 years ago. Maybe 3 years ago. The picture's changed significantly. What the negotiations are between the Home Office and MEAs about the amount they're paid and the criteria around that, that's commercial and secure information, so that's not shared. I think the only thing of note is that MEAs is, like all the other housing providers, a profit-making organisation. It's a private business, so they have a profit margin which they need to meet.
Right. I think unless anybody else has got any, Ben, I was going to ask if you wanted to comment on this, if you've got any comments or suggestions or anything.
Firstly, I thought the presentation was really, really interesting. Perhaps I should say that up until 2016, I represented asylum seekers in appeals against Home Office decision to refuse people asylum. I think it's worth noting, and I think Sarah pointed out, that the appeals system and the decision-making system is very, very complex and very, very difficult for people to work out. And it's very frustrating for them. There's language barriers, there's cultural barriers, particularly if they're not represented. And often the decisions are inexplicable to the person who has made the application. I also think it's worth pointing out that approximately a third of appeals against the Home Office decision to refuse asylum are allowed ultimately. And also that I think up until the middle of May last year, I think 60% of all asylum applications ended up in a grant of leave to remain, which I think is quite telling. So, and the other thing is my personal experience is that ultimately people who seek asylum, their biggest issue when they're in a strange place is they want to be treated with respect and dignity, and as Sarah said, treated as human beings.
Thanks, Ben. I think the point on, I think Sarah did cover it a bit on access to legal aid is becoming a huge problem across Yorkshire. I mean, you know, we've got about 3 legal aid provision solicitors. There are probably a possible, you know, a few other community groups, but that's not the point. They don't have the same access to the resources they need. And a local firm are actually going into hotels to try and help people understand the asylum system so that they can go through it themselves, and to be prepared for going through our asylum system, which you need to be registered to give advice on because it's so complex. But they're going into hotels and telling a whole lot of people that maybe don't have English as a first language, or, you know, maybe have different levels of education and understanding of the British system, and they're expecting them to go and represent themselves because there is no provision. And that is what you know, a few of our local solicitors from a very, very good law firm are doing in the hotels just now. So it's very, very sad. Mike.
Yes, thank you, Chair. Just one or two members have made suggestions about taking things forward from this discussion, but we haven't got any firm decisions on that. I just wonder whether perhaps Councillor Dickinson, Councillor Smith, myself and Ben, when he starts with us on Monday, perhaps can get together and see how we might suggest back to the board at a future meeting how we take some of these things forward. So we've had a really good information receiving and discussion session, but do we actually do a little bit of work outside the meeting so we can assist you as the scrutiny board in how you wish to take some of these things forward?
Yeah. Do we have any recommendations or anything that we want to take forward on this, or are we just happy to note the report?
Well, I think, Chair, other than me and Councillor Dickinson and yourself and Ben probably going away and doing that work outside the meeting, I haven't heard any other recommendations. I
think the recommendation from Sarah about you know, starting the process for Calderdale to be a council of sanctuary, would that be suitable for this report?
That's it.
And sorry, Councillor Holsworth, you've had your hand up. I'll let you come in just now.
Thank you, Councillor Smith. I found the whole presentation this evening absolutely fascinating. I did know some bits of it, but by no means all. And I just wonder if there's any way in which we can get the Halifax Courier to maybe write an article explaining the difficulties that people coming to this country are facing. Because you're right, there is the demonisation of asylum seekers. You know, our current Home Secretary and her wish to get everyone on a plane to Rwanda. And none of the things that we're fed through the national press, from what I've heard tonight, are at all accurate. And maybe we should try and explain how the system really does work against people, so that the community in Halifax, I know that broadly speaking, it's a very welcoming community, is better informed about the difficulties that people coming to this country are facing, and also the very interesting point about proportionately how few people who are seeking asylum actually end up in the UK. And I don't know if that's a runner at all, but I think it's something that perhaps we could give some thought to.
So, Sarah, do you want to come in finally? And then I think we'll just go to Mike for closure.
Just on that point, it's a really good one, and we have an awareness raising program. So we go into schools and organisations to do exactly that. We've just done one in Brighouse, actually, wanting to sort of support the Lower Valley in partnership with Valley of Sanctuary to do that. So yeah, more of that, and any ideas and any involvement from elected members would be wonderful.
Joe, very, very final.
Yeah, Mike, not too sure on procedure as I'm new to scrutiny. Would it be possible for me to propose that as a scrutiny board we recommend that whoever responsible looks at becoming a council of sanctuary? Is that something we can do? Is Mike frozen?
No, yes,
Oh, no.
Yes, you can.
Okay, I will propose that.
Excellent. Somebody want to second that proposal, that Calderdale Council become a council of sanctuary? We've got Sue and Dave, both willing to second. Take your pick. Right, thank you very, very much. It was a really, really interesting presentation, and I really appreciate you all coming along.
Sorry, Chair, you had that proposed and seconded. Can you just put that to the vote for all members?
Oh, sorry.
Okay.
Oh dear, minor detail. Okay, all those in favour?
Thank you.
Those against? Any abstentions? Right, thank you.
Sorry, Chair, can I just have a quick
Yes.
comment? I'm my first session today. I've no idea what I'm voting on, so I've not voted. I'll abstain on that.
Okay.
I've no idea what these terms mean, so I think it's just best if I abstain on that.
Okay.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Sorry. I hope you find out more about it.
Yes, thank you.
Right. Okay. With that in mind, we will now move on to the next item, if that's okay. And thank you all very much for coming in. I really appreciate that. Bye.
Thank you. Goodbye. Bye.
Okay, so the next item we have, we have Adrian to present winter preparedness. Are you happy to go ahead with the next item?
Good evening all. So just
Thank
by way
you.
of introduction, I know we did that very brief at the start, but my name is Adrian Gill. I'm the new apologies, get my teeth in. I'm the new Assistant Director for Strategic Infrastructure, so taking over from Stephen Lee. I've been with the council now just over 3 months, so rapidly getting to grips with my new role, what that entails, and amongst many things, winter service. I'm very pleased that I've been joined this evening by Jonathan Cole, who is our corporate lead for green space and street scene. Winter service, funding for that sits within strategic infrastructure, and the policy set by strategic infrastructure, but it's delivered by Jonathan and his team in public services. So I think the purpose of this agenda item was to give you an overview of the service that we provide, perhaps put that into context in terms of the current weather that we've experienced, particularly over the Christmas period, and perhaps answer any questions you have about how we fund that service. And I'm sure there'll be lots of questions about decisions that we make and the extent of the service as well. What I would say before Jonathan gives you a little bit of that overview is that, unsurprisingly, it is a service that's under considerable pressure. And when we're looking at savings across the council, winter service is something where we need to look very carefully at getting that back down to the current budget to ensure it's affordable moving forwards. But perhaps that's something we can revisit once Jonathan's given his overview. Jonathan, I sincerely hope you're still on the line.
Good evening, folks. As Adrian says, my name's Jonathan Cole. Up until a few years ago, I worked as part of what was Regeneration and Development at the time. But a few years ago, we moved as an operational service into public services. I now worked for Andrew Pitts, and since that move, there's been reorganisations in that service, and I now run a new service, Green Space and Street Scene, that's a day-to-day operational service for everything that's green on streets, as it says on the tin. Before I give a quick overview of what happens around winter, and rather than doing a presentation, I'm going to just show a few screenshots of some of the information that officers use to make decisions around winter. So you can see that it's not just me looking out my back door and making a bit of a guess at what's going on. We actually have quite a bit of science behind what goes on, and then we'll pick up from there. So the screen that should be sharing on your screens now is a screen that's provided by a company called DTN. DTN are a European forecasting provider, and they currently are the winning contractors for the contract for the West Yorkshire Consortium, and provide weather forecasting for all the 5 West Yorkshire councils. They produce a new forecast every morning at 8 o'clock, one at 11 o'clock, one at 5 o'clock, and a third forecast at 10 o'clock in the evening. Each of these forecasts are checked by the on-call decision maker, and depending on the information provided, our action plans are built up from this information. We get a detailed forecast, textual forecast. We then get what's called a hazard summary that will show hazards, and then we actually get access to their radar system that shows radar of cloud cover, rainfall, both actual and forecasts, and weather types. You'll see there's a note here that talks about A603 for Hebden Bridge. Council actually has its own road weather station, and the road weather station is actually just at Peckett Well, and this page gives us a detailed forecast for that actual part of the road network in Calderdale. And we actually get access through into cameras from that weather station on this site, and we can see real-time observations, next 36-hour or next 8-day forecast. We can see that both in a format of textual, or we can go into graphs. This weather station actually has our own access as well. From the councils, from our own side, we have our own access into this weather station, and that's provided by the company that provides the weather station for us. This weather station is maintained every summer, has a full recalibration every summer, and we have a 24-hour call-out contract with this provider if the weather station goes down. The weather station provides lots of information. About 20 different types of information is reported from this weather station on a 10-minute basis. And this information is used by our forecast provider to give us and produce what we have, a graph every night of the forecast for the road network. And actually, as a weather forecast, as a road weather forecasting service, we're not actually worried about how warm the air is. We're actually concerned about how cold the surface of the road is going to be. And the red line on here is the forecast surface for tonight. Currently, the road surface should be forecast to be 8.1, and we're currently running at 7.8. So we're actually running pretty tight to forecast, with a minimum temperature of 3 degrees tomorrow morning. This weather station is around 1,000 foot from sea level. Now, Calderdale has some roads that are higher than that. So you might say, well, how do we know if some of those roads are higher than that are going to be colder? This weather station actually has some very clever inbuilt technology that allows us to view what's called the thermal fingerprint of the roads in Calderdale. And this is the Calderdale road network. And actually there that shows the forecasted road surface temperatures for the whole of Calderdale tonight. So on nights where maybe the weather station is showing it's going to be 1 degree above freezing, some of our roads will be below freezing. And we use a very limited action called cold routes that allows us to grip a small part of the network that is below freezing. So those people traveling that network are safe. The rest of the roads don't get gritted as a cost saving. The other advantage of this system is it gives us access to surrounding weather stations, and we have access to about 12 other weather stations that surround Calderdale. So Calderdale is here, where I'm hovering over Hebden Bridge, and you'll see that we can actually we've got access to cameras north, south, east, and west of us. So it means when weather fronts are coming in, we can see them arriving earlier, see the effects of the temperature, and we also have all these weather stations have their own onboard cameras, so you can see road conditions. So it allows us to be able to provide, when we're actually actively in a snow situation, for example, we can see the snow arriving. If it's coming from the west, we'll see it arriving at Bacup first, and we can then sort of time our actions at the end of the valley to time with that. So you might say, well, why do we go gritting? And sort of what is the logical reason why we're going to go on a particular sort of evening? Just 1 second. You should now be able to see a thing that says technical appendice for support for winter service policy. This is actually how we make our decisions. So actually we actually follow a matrix when we're making our decisions. So the 4 decision makers that make the decisions are using the same matrix. We follow the matrix through that brings us to a decision whether we're going to go gritting or not. And then actually on the second page of this, we actually have a table that actually tells us how much salt to put down. This is based on scientific calculations, and these are nationally recommended spread rates, nationally recommended across the country to provide adequate protection to the public travelling on those roads. And you'll see with different temperatures and different road conditions, we have to use different spread rates. Since the introduction of the salt barn, this has allowed us to get down to spread rates of 10 grams. Previously, you would not have seen any numbers on the right-hand side lower than 15 grams when we had our outdoor stored salt. And this is actually how the service has managed to afford to actually build a salt barn. Savings in the salt has been used to actually pay the potential borrowing to cover the cost of actually building a salt barn. But dry salt is a far better material to spread, lasts a lot better, no loss due to rain wash, and is actually better to be spread by the gritters. And it allows us on these very marginal nights to use a low spread rates that's good for the environment, but also good from a cost saving point of view. I know a lot of you will get questions from members about where to access information, and the best way is to direct people to use the council's web pages. There's a dedicated page for winter service gritting, and this page has a bit of talk about how we do it. On the right hand side, our latest Twitters that we tweet every time we put an action out, and these can be visualized on the right hand side. So you need to have a Twitter account. You can see it on the council's website. You can link for a map to show you what roads we grit, or if you want it as a Word version, you can see it as a Word version. And also, if we get requests about why isn't my road gritted, we refer people to this gritting decision policy chart that actually shows how we decide whether a new road is built or a new road that becomes adopted will be gritted. And actually this explains it in very simple form. And this was some great work Comms did with us to sort of pictorialize how we do stuff. The service is supported the decision makers we have are all council employees, or senior officer grade employees, and they're supported by a team of supervisors who are also my day staff, who provide 24-hour cover to supervise the operations and provide emergency response to the police and things for accidents. And the bulk of the work then is done by contracted out organisations, and most of these are local hauliers, farmers, local contractors that provide the service to us. As Adrian talks about pressures, we've seen the contract is currently a 5-year contract that comes to the end of its life this year, and it has a price variation clause in it. And with the high rates of CPI, we've seen just the cost of our plant hire for the season go up by something like 10-12% this year. But also there was a change by the government around what fuel gritters could use. They used to run on red diesel, now they have to run on white diesel. And we're currently still calculating the cost of that, and we'll have to reimburse the contractors for their increased costs. But the contractors are basically paying about 70 to 80 pence more a litre of fuel than they were paying. And that will have to be borne by the council for this one season only, and then the following seasons when we reprice the contracts, they will include that in their tendered rates. That should hopefully give you an overview of what's going on, and I think best thing going forward would be to actually deal with people's questions. I'm sure people have.
Thank you very much. Really interesting. The technology that we've got on our website is quite fascinating, isn't it? A really good overview of what's actually happening outside. Has anybody got any questions for Jonathan? Yep, Dave. Councillor Young.
Thank you, Chair. First of all, I'd like to make a small statement on this. It's the first year in the 12 years I've been on Calderdale Council where I have not received one email about non-gritting, which is very unusual. So I think the teams must be doing a really good job this winter. So the question I asked to Jonathan, has it been milder this winter than in other winters? And have we used less salt than normal?
I would say we're currently sat at a relatively average winter. The usage this winter, I can actually tell you because we keep records on a daily basis, so I can actually tell you exactly. And in 1 second, let's log onto my tablet. I can tell you exactly what we've used. I'll put it in the chat in a minute, Councillor. It's been an average winter so far. Not seen any extraordinary snow events, and it tends to be the extraordinary snow events that are the ones that start to cause. You know, we just can't be everywhere all the time, and that's the ones that start to, I think, cause the more you getting more of the cause, I suspect. But yeah, it's been what I'd describe an average so far winter.
Thank you. Sue? Councillor Holdsworth.
Thank you, Councillor Smith, Audrey. Yeah, it was just a quick question. I was really impressed with the weather station, and I wondered, is it monitored 24/7? So if there's a sudden change, then action can be taken.
Yeah, so we monitor while we're up during the daytime. We're keeping an eye on stuff. If there's a night that's extremely strange from a forecasting point of view, we'll set the alarm and get up in the night and check things. But our contract we have with our forecast provider, they're also monitoring, and they obviously have staff working 24 hours a day. We have some thresholds set. So the other night they woke me up to tell me that it had gone below 3 degrees. Because 3 degrees is the point where some of our highest parts of our network might start to go below freezing, depending if the conditions are correct. So they do that monitoring for us overnight. And if we get sudden drops, they will give us a ring. And that's why sometimes if any of you do monitor Twitter, you might see that we've planned for doing a 4 o'clock in the morning grit, and then suddenly you might see that we've actually changed the plan and we're going straight away at 10 o'clock at night, and that'll be because something's changed in the forecast.
Thank you. Councillor Johnson.
Yeah, thank you, and thank you for coming along and providing the presentation. I was just going to ask about it might be something that's difficult to have to hand or off the top of your head. Do we know? I know unadopted roads is a massive issue for people, but I'm conscious that a lot of what I get in my ward actually around Greater and Winter is around unadopted roads. Do we know roughly what proportion of roads are unadopted? And also in terms of, you know, policy, obviously the policy is not to grit unadopted roads because obviously they're not the council's responsibility. But is there anything in terms of, for example, grit bin provision and considering the kind of how near we are to unadopted roads in terms of that allocation? Because I'm thinking, being slightly naughty, if we were to place grit bins near unadopted roads, then those roads could use it and still kind of have some form of gritting service, even if it's something they're providing themselves.
So the money that's provided to the Highway Authority is provided to the Highway Authority purely to maintain roads that are maintainable at the highway's expense. And that is the adopted highway. And that's what the adopted highway network means, is actually roads that are maintained at the council's expense. The only time we'll carry out any form of interaction on an unadopted street, if it's suitable, will be when there is support required to the emergency services. I have before now, I have snowplowed over about 3 miles, formerly 4 miles, out onto the moors to actually get ambulances out to a very seriously injured patient. So we do provide support to emergency services in those situations, but the money that's allocated to the Highway Authority is purely for the adopted highway network. And if you buy a house on an adopted road, as part of that buying the house, you take a responsibility and you should actually run your own maintenance funds for that road. And that's a consequence. A house will be technically less valuable on the unadopted road for that reason. So no, we've got we'd have no intention to do that, and there's actually the council has no duty to do that either.
Thanks, Jonathan. Just on that, we've got a duty to keep the roads clear. What about pavements? Because I know, and especially in the case of houses on hills where it is a steep pavement only access. I wonder, what do we have no duty of care to do anything about that? So
the council has what is called a reasonable practical duty to maintain the network clear of sort of snow and ice. Now, it's what's reasonable to do. We're currently covering something like 50 kilometers of roads every time we go out gritting. It would not be reasonably practical to cover all of those areas. As I say, when the conditions are severe, we'll do what we call hazard patrols, and we'll actually have gritters running during the night time, monitoring urgent situations. But we also do that so that actually, if there is an emergency response required, we don't have to get somebody out of bed to get them to the depot to load them with salt. They're actually there and about on the network to respond straight away to assist the emergency services. And we've actually done that. We've had 2 calls for that this winter already, where we've provided emergency response to emergency services to sort of relatively large sort of incidents that were going to be ongoing. So actually, that's the way we deal with it. Where a street will score, where a street, or we now score areas. So I'll actually put 2 or 3 streets together, and we'll score those for salt bins. People will then, if they score the appropriate number of points, they will get a salt bin allocated. But that's for self-help. And actually, there's a lot of people who live in Calderdale who live on roads where they have to self-help to get themselves out. I live on a road that's a self-help road, and when I was operating supervisor, and I used to get called out at 3 or 4 o'clock in the morning, the first job was to actually go and had to dig out the sick corner and grit that section so I could get out to go to work. So we can provide that help, but we just don't have the resources to actually go out and do all that sort of stuff that would be needed.
But I just think the access to, is there something on the website that says how groups can, groups of roads can get together and get salt bins allocated? Because I know some salt bins have been removed.
The only salt bins that will have been removed will be ones that when there was a previous review back in 2017, 2018, and quite a few roads were taken off the gritting network for a short period of time. Salt bins were put out to cover some of those roads, and some of them didn't get picked up in all the work that was done to try to get everything back on the gritting network at that time. And if we come across the odd one of those that's been put out incorrectly, or occasionally we get people nicking them from locations and putting them somewhere else, so we then go and pick them up and put them back to the right places. That will be done, but any requests are looked at, and where possible we will look at doing what we do called grouping, and we'll group several roads together and do it that way, because by doing that I can normally get enough property or enough length of road to make it score the points to get a grip in.
Oh, well, that's interesting. We can do it on the website, or they could do it through councillors, I suppose, or
yeah,
email.
they can just go to the contact centre and put a request in through the contact centre. That's the best way, and then that gets come through to one of my officers who will then look at it.
Right. Okay. Thank you. Joe, you've got your hand up. I think you just asked that question, so I think I'll move on to Councillor Benton, please.
Thank you, Chair. Yeah, it's just regarding the salt bins, actually. Just wondering how often exceptions are made to the criteria with regards to your point system for the elderly. I know my colleagues requested a new salt bin be located in an elderly complex, and he's been told it's too close, within close proximity to another one. But obviously it's not accessible by them because they are elderly. How do we?
If it's actually a formal location, so if it was an anchor sanctuary or a sanctuary area, the ward and control type location, that actually does score points. There's an additional field for scoring points that actually they do score points for that. Without actually knowing the particular case, the best thing to do would be, you can work my email out. It's pretty easy for Calderdale. Drop me it across. I'll look at that one personally, and I'll drop your reply back about the whys or no's behind it.
Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Atkinson?
Thank you. I've got a couple of quick questions. One's around nursing homes and why it doesn't meet category 1, especially if we sort of have a cold snap of 2 weeks maybe. The chance of an ambulance needing to get to a nursing home over a 2-week period are going to be close to 100%, I would expect. And the second one is around, can private companies pay for the council services, etc.? I know supermarkets are mentioned, and I get the reason why they're in there to provide food and etc. But if it's a long 2-mile drive that the council grits, do the supermarkets contribute towards the cost of the gritting?
So when it talks about supermarkets in there, this was some work we did around strategic road network, and actually supermarkets are deemed as being a very essential part of everyday modern life. And when we talk about gritting supermarkets, we're not talking about gritting to the front door of the supermarket. We're about making sure that the road adjacent is gritted. So at Asda, for example, we grit down Hanson Lane, and we grit across the roundabout there. But actually it's up to Asda. It's Asda's own responsibility to grit from the roundabout up their access road into their own site. So we don't actually grit. We do what as a highway service we class as private, but it's actually council. So we provide gritting services to other council departments. So the crematorium is gritted every time we go out gritting. We also grit the Halifax bus station and Brighouse bus station and Tottenham bus station, and West York Metro pay for that. We grit Halifax fire station, and we grit some of the main car parks in Halifax, and the parking services pay for that. But we don't do any private work at all. We're not set up for that, and our priority has to be maintaining the strategic network for the sort of emergency services to be able to carry out their really key functional roles. The question around nursing homes is, if a nursing home is on a main road, it'll be gritted anyway. If a nursing home is down a cul-de-sac, the chances it wouldn't be suitable for gritting anyway, because there's most not going to be an adequate turning head. And as I say, we've got very good relationships with our local emergency services. And if there was a situation ongoing and they required attention to service, they would get it, and they get it pretty promptly. I say when it's really conditions are really bad, we'll have vehicles available sort of on standby to actually do that type of activity. So it's not a problem that we're aware of that needs a change. And the problem is, I'm already saying to Adrian that I think I'm going to be £300,000 or £400,000 above budget already this year. This is not a service that has got an ability to start adding extra stuff on it, because actually once you pick up one thing, councillor, you actually find that there'll be 30, 40 others that would actually be the same thing. And we spent a lot of work on that, doing that chart, and that was to try to produce a very fair and service. And we did a lot of consultation with emergency partners, including the ambulance service, things like that, and they were very happy with the way the level of service we were getting in Calderdale, and actually felt that we were doing far more than actually some of our other authorities were, and they were actually very happy that there wasn't problems, because as they say, you never know where the next 999 call's coming from, and actually it's more likely to be in some farmhouse in the middle of nowhere than it's actually to be in a well-maintained nursing home that's got a nurse on scene with that patient.
Thanks, Jonathan. It might also be somebody trying to walk along to the shops. I think a lot of people just fall on pavements and break a lot of bones, especially older people. So I do think we need to look at pavements. And as we move to Active Calderdale, maybe we could get them to fund some pavement gritting, because I do think pavement underlooked, and I don't know why they're not properly resourced. Okay.
Councillor, I would. Some councils do have a farm. We do no proactive gritting on pavements at all in Calderdale. Halifax, sort of the main shopping areas in Halifax get picked up because they're actually also roadways. So if you think about most of Halifax town centre, the bulk of that's actually a roadway as well. So if you're thinking about Market Street, Southgate and Market Street, they're actually roadways as well. So they get gritted as part of that. So there is always a safe route through. If we get severe conditions, and we had, I think, a couple of Saturdays before Christmas, we had some really bad conditions, and we put some hand salt teams into Halifax before we even started getting requests for that service. And we do some sort of reactive type gritting services. Footway gritting compared with carriageway gritting is very labour intensive and very plant intensive. And you could easily be looking at increasing your budget by £500,000 to £1 million a year if you wanted to start proactively gritting pavements in the borough. It would be a significant increase over road gritting, because it is so much. If you imagine road gritter can drive at road speed, I can't send things down the footpath at road speed. We're talking about going at walking speed, so it would be significant extra resources. And that's if we can find contractors who are willing to do that type of work as well.
Yeah, I suppose looking at the gritting and people, in the shops being able to grit, maybe with council grit, have a grit salt bale thing outside the shopping centres, so that people can put grit there. But I mean, shopping centres aren't so bad. I think I'm more worried about pedestrian streets, people getting out of the house. That's my biggest difficulty, is getting from my house to the bus stop, because the pavement's so slippy. But anyway, I think that's something I feel quite strongly that we should look at gritting pavements. But anyway, like you say, we haven't got that money at the moment. Councillor Clark, have you asked your question?
No, I haven't. Thanks, Chair. I'll ask it now. It's down to detail, and it's about the gritting and spreading rate. And I noticed that quite a few in the list. It might have said that you would do 2 15-gram spreads per however much, or 1 30-gram. Which do we do? Do we do it twice? I think notice that this is in wet conditions mostly. So do you do it while it's raining and then after it's rained and then it starts freezing? Or How do we do it? And if we do it only once, is that because we only have capacity to do it once?
So a lot of the, when we get into these higher spread rates, it's once you get above 20 grams of salt, some of your gritters can't get around the full route without coming back to reload to the amount of salt they can carry. And depends on the time window we've got from being able to start the action to the freezing time. So if it takes us about 3 hours to do a full turn around the network. So if the rain was going to stop at 6 o'clock and it was going to freeze at 9 o'clock, what we would do is we would go and do a 15-gram grit first of all. So we know in the 3 hours we've gone around and we've got some salt down the network. The temperature goes down slowly over the night. Therefore, we'd go back out again, either that evening or later in the night, and we put a further 15 grams down to get us enough salt to hold us at the coldest point in the night. So it's based on the timings. If we'd got a big 5 hour window before it was going to freeze after it stopped raining, we'd must put the 30 grams down straight away and get it all down in one go, because that would be cheaper. Because some of the gritters will get around in one run, others would have to come back and reload. It's just a decision made by the decision maker, gives them options. Because the critical thing is, at the point of freezing, I need to have some salt on the network to make it safe, and that allows us that flexibility to just to work with the conditions that are there on a daily basis. Sometimes we do have to go gritting in the rain, like you say. I had that situation on Boxing Day where we had rain falling onto surfaces that were freezing. So I actually went 3 times. I went out on Boxing Day, pretty much back to back, and only the last one was actually when we actually got dry. So actually, took the first 2 runs were ready to keep the public safe until it got washed away, and we then went and topped it up with some more. And unfortunately, that would have been a very expensive, gritting action, but it was needed to make sure the public was safe.
Sorry, Jonathan. Have a drink. I'm just wondering about staffing levels. I mean, do you have enough staff to do this 2 or 3 times a night? Or, obviously, you must have if you're managing to do it. But what sort of pressure is that?
So decision makers work on, because we're not actually actively out on the network. We're just based from the office or from home. There's 2 of us on that cover 24 hours at a time, and if the lead decision makers had a really bad night and been up a lot, the second decision maker will take over. But it also means that there's somebody there to speak to at 2 o'clock in the morning and have a discussion about what action we're going to take. Our supervisors work their normal day job, but they're on call 12 hours on, 12 hours off, so that they always get their adequate 11 hours rest time, according to our HR policy. And all the gritting is done by contractors. And all the contractors have a minimum of 2 drivers for every gritter they have on for us, so that they can take rest time. And actually, a lot of the contractors work out come from the farming sort of field, and in the winter time they're actually not too much ongoing. So actually, they work it around their farming lives. But we keep a really close eye on that, and staff are very monitored for making sure they get adequate rest.
Thank you.
Thank you. And Joe, do you want to come back in with your?
Just kind of briefly on the unadopted road thing. I'm conscious that it's our experience is being private renters and living on unadopted roads. So I'm wondering if there's a piece of work we could look at in terms of encouraging landlords to perhaps provide some kind of service, because I'm conscious it's an access issue that we kind of have no real control over. I was just going to ask about specifically the criteria for Great Bin policy. I know it's kind of been hinted at. There's some element, and I've done it myself, there's some element of rigging the numbers a little bit. So looking at, if I include this street and this street and this street, and this one's got a health centre on it, and trying to make it up to achieve that, to achieve a certain score so it does get a Great Bin. I know there's an element of that, and it is quite difficult to do. For me, just looking at the special features, there's obviously, you've got elderly residents / sheltered accommodation, you've got schools, health centres, and then running water and road, which individually have their own scores, but don't necessarily get high enough to mean that a Great Bin is placed there. I'm just wondering if it'd be possible whether it comes back to scrutiny or whether we look at it just around perhaps extending what counts as a special feature and perhaps looking at the numbers, because the one that stands out for me, and I think other councils have referenced it, is around elderly residents. And, you know, whether there would be, I'm sure there'd be a significant cost of, say, having a policy whereby if there's an elderly residence, we, you know, by default place a grit bin there, but it would be something that it might be worth looking at, because I think a lot of the casework I've received is just around that. It's just around roads and elderly residents and around that. So I'm wondering if that is something we could look at.
When the spreadsheet refers to elderly, it refers to a defined location, not that there's 25 people on the street that are over 70. It's actually that there is a residential, there's some form of elderly vision on that street. So I say Anchor, Anchor or Shelter, or one of these sort of organisations that might have a ward and controlled unit, that would count. If my granny lived on the street, it wouldn't count. That doesn't have any bearing, because that's not information that's available, and doesn't have any value, because actually if you started looking at demographics, I'm actually a heart surgeon, so I have to go out to Leeds. You could, where would we stop? So that's purely is to look at where there is a defined sort of health sort of related establishment, if that makes sense.
Yeah, sorry if that wasn't clear. That's kind of no, just specifically what I mean is in that defined group, would it be possible to make it kind of a default that we put a grip in there? Could we look at the cost for that and bring it back to scrutiny, something like that?
As I say, it's like I'm not sure which one of the councillors was saying this. Do we really want to encourage your Auntie Doris at 92 with a dodgy hip to be trying to go out and spread salt on an untreated surface? This is more about, so that the way we look at it is that it's for provision of, for assistance for like ambulances attending to that event, or doctors attending to that thing, or the district nurses attending. I wouldn't want to be encouraging sort of people like that to be trying to do this. This is not, hand salting is not an easy task, and actually, it's a real balance of sort of how we would look at that. I think if it's an established organisation, it's something that we will always look at and see whether we can work with them. If it's sheltered accommodation or something like that.
Jonathan, you brought up a few interesting points there, and you, Councillor Thompson. I think one of them makes me wonder a little bit about who are the decision makers, because it's just how are we making decisions on where is this policy, where can it be changed to make it better? And I don't know, maybe it would even save money if we revisited making our streets safer in terms of gritting. But sorry, Mike, you come in. You've probably got something much more. You're muted. Your turn.
Councillor Lynn has her hand up, and she may want to respond on this particular issue. But I'll come in at the end, Councillor Smith.
Okay, thanks. Sorry, Councillor Lynn.
Yes, I just wanted to say that really just a big thank you to Adrian and to Jonathan, really, for all the work that they've done. And just to point out that actually it's a mere 3 to 4 years ago that a great deal of work was done, some of it actually by a predecessor, prompted in part by predecessor scrutiny panel discussions and so on. And a great deal of work went into defining the criteria by which the decision makers who are council staff what are the criteria that are used for both the gritting of roads and for the allocation of salt bins. So I'll be perfectly honest with you, I would be very reluctant to say that I think it's a great idea to ask Jonathan and his colleagues to go back and do this work again, because I think it's been done relatively recently, within the last 5 years. I think that the point that Councillor Young came in and said, he hasn't had too many issues really raised with him about the gritting service and everything. And I think I'm not saying there aren't improvements that can be made, and I'm quite sure that if individual members of the panel have got issues that they'd like to put across to Jonathan, or indeed to Adrian, I'm sure they'd be happy to respond to the queries. But I would be reluctant to sanction going away and looking afresh at the whole thing, because I think it's been done relatively recently, and if it ain't broke, don't fix it. That's my comment. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Lynn. I think that the point is what's not being gritted, not what is being gritted. And I think, we all know that costs are a major factor. Mike?
I just wanted to say, this item is on the agenda because Councillor Thompson raised it, and I think it's been a really interesting and useful discussion. When I discussed the item with Andrew Pitts before we put it on the agenda, he suggested it might be a good idea to have a winter preparedness item as a standing item, say in September or October every year, so that before we start winter, hopefully, touch wood, then you have an opportunity as a scrutiny board to have a look at what's planned for the year ahead and comment, rather than coming in with Jonathan and Adrian telling us about things that have happened, which has been interesting, but is in the past. If I may take the opportunity while I'm on, just to remind you that if you put comments or information in chat, the public can't see it, and it's a meeting in public. And either John Greenwood from the Courier is either watching it tonight, or he'll be watching it tomorrow or the day after, and we'll report on both these items, I'm sure. And we need to make sure he gets all the information that everyone else gets. Thank you.
Thanks, Mike. So to say in the chat, the link to the website was put in, so people can see how to request gritting bins. Adrian, do you want to finish off?
Yeah, thank you, Chair. I think it was probably just to come back in on I think we started to touch on this, and I think Jonathan's alluded to it as well. We do have a policy which sets out the gritting and the activities that we do. I mentioned at the start, and Jonathan touched on it, that actually, and as I come into the council and got to grips with the various budget lines that I'm responsible for, probably winter service is the most unpredictable. So when you look back over the last 5-10 years, I think the least we've probably spent on winter service is probably 500,000 or 600,000, and the most we've spent is 2.8 million. So there's a huge range in any given year that we can spend on the winter service. We have to make an allowance for that in terms of budgeting, which we do, and that allowance is about 1.4 million. That has been exceeded every year for the last 3 years. And when we look at some of the pressures we're facing in terms of inflation, which impacts on salt, fuel, manpower associated with this service, and also some of the changes to the switch from red diesel to white diesel, I also think we have a policy which works really well, but we are going to have to look at that and to see how we can make the service more efficient to manage within the current budget allocation. Otherwise, we are going to have to look at ways of allocating additional monies or a contingency fund for things such as the winter service. Because moving forwards, the budgets are such that we can't afford to overspend, to the potential that we can on winter service, because if we have a bad year, costs can escalate really quickly. So I think what I was trying to say with that is, we need to see how we get on this winter, but we probably will need to lay out how we intend to manage the winter service costs moving forwards in the coming year. And that then might be the right point to come back to this group to discuss the winter service moving forwards as well.
Thank you, and thank you both. It's been a really interesting discussion, and I think we've all, had an opportunity to ask you, to grill you, Jonathan. I appreciate that. Thank you ever so much.
As I say, if anybody's got any one-off questions, just drop them on my email, and I'll have a look at them and I'll come back to you. If it's just a routine request, just put it through the normal systems, and it'll get one of my officers dealing with it. But if it's something that's a one-off sort of question of or point of sort of interest, or something about why have we done something or not done something, just let me know, and I can't promise I'll get back to you straight away, but I will get back to you in due course with an answer.
Right, thank you very much. Right, okay. I think we can move now to the last item, which is the private rented accommodation scrutiny report that Steph was sort of led on. So Steph, do you want to sort of introduce the item, please?
Yeah, thanks, Chair. Right, the private sector rented housing report. This is, it's not particularly a discussion, although you of course can talk about it as much as you like. But it is, we've put this report forward so that we can adopt it and send it to Cabinet. And what we want Cabinet to, well, we want, first of all, the Place Scrutiny Board to accept the recommendations and then send the whole report to Cabinet. There are one or two things that will cost us money. There are one or two things that will just need some sort of reorganisation. I think there are many recommendations, but only a few will cost us money. So those ones need considering when you're thinking about budgets. The majority of private sector renting landlords are good ones, but there are of course a few that aren't, and we need environmental health to have the resources to enforce whatever they can enforce on housing that is not up to standard. So that's one of the recommendations, that we change or add a resource to environmental health to enable that to happen. I'm hoping that you've all read and agree with all the recommendations. And can I put that to the board now?
Yes, thank you. Dave, is that you proposing?
Yes, I'm happy to propose recommendations as laid out in the order paper.
Thank you.
Does anybody else have anything to add? Joe?
I also read the report and happy to support it. I just wanted to kind of raise something here with people, and I'm not sure, Mike, if you've been aware of this, that there have been some councils where, when decisions on the private rented sector have came forward, people who privately rent have been excluded from decision making on the basis of of legal advice from the council. And I just thought worth mentioning that now, and I'm not sure if it's something we've been made aware of yet, but I know it has happened. Strikes me as somewhat concerning, and just for something to people to be aware of as well.
Mike?
I wasn't aware of that. I think that scrutiny committees are not decision-making bodies, so the level at which a declaration of interest is significant, I think, is a bit lower, a bit higher, probably, or whichever way you want to put it. And I think, I mean, Ian Hughes, I'm sure if you were here, would say where there's a sufficient number of people who, in their normal course of their lives, use a council service or get their housing from a particular sector, then it's it'd be a bit like excluding people who are parents from discussions about schools. So if anyone here is a landlord of 50 properties and is in that business, then that's one thing. But I'm sure Ian, if you were here, would agree with me that wouldn't be a substantive declaration of of interest. If I may, while I'm speaking, would be to thank the colleagues that we worked with in several departments of the council who really worked with us on this piece of work and wrote good chunks of the report, to be honest. And if you do recommend taking it to cabinet, then we'll arrange for that to go on the cabinet agenda, subject to the agreement of the leader, because it's his meeting, and ask either Councillor Dickinson or Councillor Clark, or both, with your permission, to present that to cabinet either at the next meeting or the February meeting. Thank you.
Thanks, Mike. Yeah, I mean, I don't see any reason why we shouldn't sort of vote on that and agree. Jenny, do you want to say something, Councillor?
Yes, just very quickly, I just wanted to say I think it's a really good report. I'm really pleased that the scrutiny panel chose to investigate this. I think it's great. Obviously I can't speak for other cabinet colleagues, but from my perspective and from Public Services and Communities perspective, we would really welcome, if it proves possible from a budget perspective, to increase the capacity of our environmental health team to enable us to respond in a stronger way, really, to issues of disrepair and so on. I think that would be terrific, but that would obviously be a decision for cabinet and ultimately for full council in terms of the budget. But I just want to say thank you very much, everybody that's put a lot of work into it. I think it's the scale, as the report makes clear, that we have more people living in the private rented sector than in social housing. And so it's a really important report, and congratulations to everybody that was involved in it. Thank you.
Thanks, Councillor Lynn, and thanks everybody. Steph?
And well, I just want to say thank you to everyone who did take part in it, including myself. There are actually 1,500 more private sector rented housing than there are social housing rented. But one of the main things as well is so that we build some sort of collaboration with landlords and of course tenants. But we now have a private rented sector liaison officer. The report says that we are going to appoint one, but I believe that we now have done. So that's a step forward. Thank you. So can I propose that we send this to cabinet?
Sorry, Chair, we've already had a proposal and a seconder.
I thought that was just for us to adopt it.
It's proposed that the recommendations within the report are accepted, and it's been seconded. So whatever recommendations you put in the report, which I think includes it going to cabinet,
okay,
that's what's been proposed. So that
your expertise.
We just need to check.
Of course, we tell.
Any amendments, Chair? If not, we can go to vote.
Any amendments? We have it clearly in the recommendations that we think additional resources should be allocated to environmental health. So I mean that's the one of the main recommendations, isn't it? No amendments. Okay, are we happy? Are we happy to go to the vote? All those in favour?
That's carried, Chair.
Thank you. Right, and that is the last item on our agenda. Thank you to everybody involved in that, and thank you all for taking part. We've got our work plan. Yep. For the next, Jenny. Gone. Right, so the last item is the work plan. Sorry.
If I may just make one proposal, really. It was suggesting that we drop the item on weave. The cabinet took a recent decision to put weave on hold, so that's moved into sort of less significance. But actually, one of the things members had asked for in the past that we haven't had on the work programme was an item about the network of charging points for electric vehicles, and officers are prepared and ready to bring an item in February about developing the network for charging points for electric vehicles. So with your permission, we want to substitute that for weave.
Can I just ask, why are we not scrutinising the decision for Weave to be taken off the agenda? Why are we not scrutinising Weave?
Well, I suppose one thing I could say, Chair, is you had the opportunity to call it in, and it hasn't been called in. So that was a decision of Cabinet that was taken. But we can add it back in. We can add that back in to a future agenda item.
All right. Okay. Sorry. Yeah, I missed that. Right. So charging points. Everybody quite happy with that? Anybody else got anything they would like to add to the work plan or comment, Joe?
Just obviously it's down as TBA on the things at the bottom, like public space protection orders, crime figure, post-16 transport. So is it now looking like they'll be in kind of the next year of place scrutiny, so from after May onwards?
Yes, probably, Chair, yes.
Anything else? Any other comments? No, shaking of the heads. I think on that note, then we will close the meeting. Thank you all very much for attending and your contributions, and see you next time. Hopefully not me cheering, but thank you. Right.
Thank you,
bye-bye.
Chair. Thank you. Bye. Bye.
Bye.